When you don't hold people accountable, that's not caring. That's uncaring. That's unkind. Caring about someone doesn't mean saying yes to them all the time. It means holding to that standard that's bigger than any one person.
And if you hold people to different standards, then you are eroding the standard, the expectations, whatever you want to say, for the group.
People care more about fairness than outcome. People will accept a no if they believe the process was fair, that they were heard, and they were respected. But if one or more of those things is missing, even a reasonable no can damage trust. Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership, why these things matter, and how we can do them well. Those are the questions we wrestle with through thoughtful discussions and real-world stories. I'm Tom Collins, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Justin Hamrick. Today we're going to talk about something that every leader faces, and honestly, a lot of leaders struggle with. How do you say no to the people you lead?
That's a real important one, because we're not talking about just saying no to a task or no to an email. But when you're actually telling a person no, somebody you're actually responsible for, that you're trying to support, that's when it gets a little harder.
Well, it does. And I think most leaders feel that struggle. You want to help, you want to support your folks, but at the same time, you're responsible for being fair, for maintaining the standards. We talked about standards recently, for the mission and its outcomes. And so sometimes those things come into direct conflict.
Yeah, it's not about just communication. It's about leadership.
Exactly. The goal isn't to avoid saying no. The goal is really to say no in a way that helps our people feel heard, respected, supported, and doesn't steal away their motivation, even when they don't get what they want.
So, we always start by sort of defining what we're talking about. And this one seems almost a little silly that we're going to define it, because it seems fairly straightforward. It's yes or no, black or white. But I don't think it's as straightforward as when you first think about it. So let's not get this wrong. Let's lay out what we're actually talking about when we're speaking about and struggling with the idea of saying no to our team or the people we're leading.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately, which is really the reason that we're doing this episode, is because it's, it's from real world recent experience. But I think that the first thing that we need to understand is that when you say no as a leader, you're not just making a decision. It's not just a yes or no decision. Those moments are bigger than the answer, really. When we have to say no or even yes, those are some of the most intense leadership moments that we can have. In those moments, we're shaping how the person on the receiving end experiences our leadership in a real way.
It's like every great relationship. There has to be healthy boundaries in everything. And leadership, mentorship, mentee, that's no different. And when you come up against those boundaries that are set for the team's well-being, for the person's well-being, for the leader's well-being, there's going to be a no. When you run up against a fence, there is that stop. So that's a really, really different way to think about it than just yes, no.
Yeah, because these moments don't end with that decision, that yes or no, right? As you're saying, I mean, this is about boundaries for everybody. It's not just this one person roaming around in some fenced-in area. This boundaries for your whole organization. What is the standard for how we're going to act? What is fairness? What is respect? What are all these things? That all goes into when we have to say no. This moment extends into how people, the person receiving the no, but also how other people interpret that, how they feel about it, how it impacts the way they trust you, how it impacts their motivation, what they're able to do, the way they're seeing things moving forward. It really has significant repercussions.
I think when you first brought up this topic, it sounded really negative. Yes is the positive, no is the negative. But as you sort of defined it, I got this visual picture in my head of a road. And when I originally thought the no was a stop sign in the end of the road, sort of a dead end street. And as you're saying it, it's really a fork. It's one of two choices. It is not a stop and that's it. That's done. It's no, but. And that but is what you're describing, the care of the team, the desire for your team to succeed beyond that no. And I think I have a personal story that sort of connects with this. I was sort of in line to be in some position, which I thought was the next step forward. I'd sort of planned for it, sort of mentally prepared for it. And so when it came to be the time, essentially what I got was a no. And I think my first reaction was, like many of my issues, it hurt my pride, that no. But what I have come to know from only sort of reflecting on it is what it was a different fork in the road. And it allowed me to have other opportunities that I actually think I'm better suited for, that I think play to my strengths, that play to my career goals. And I think the persons sort of making those decisions and sort of telling me the no knew that, whether implicitly or sort of explicitly, like, and I think that's sort of what you're talking about. Like, it wasn't, that no was just another path, but allowed me to continue to move in a different direction and continue to grow. It was not feeding the plant. It was just, no, you're not going to have that. No, we're not going to do this. It's going to be something different.
Yeah, that's a good example. And it actually, and we'll get to this shortly, just here in a second, it's something I've been thinking a lot about. And that's what I would call the types of no's. You mentioned you see it as a fork in the road, and here's this one path and here's the other path. And as I've been thinking about it, I think that there's more than those two options. And so we'll get to that just here in a second. But there's some other things that kind of wanted to say. It's not just about the yes or no. It's how that decision, how people, and this gets to the so what section a little bit, we'll get into, but it's how people experience it. You can deliver the same no, the same outcome, I should say, but in totally different ways. If people feel like they were heard, you took them seriously, and there are legitimate reasons why it's a no, that's different than because I said so. I mean, like, those are totally different outcomes and how people experience it. So, I think that there is a lot to be said for that. Now, back to this idea of the fork in the road and what I've been thinking about the types of no, and I don't know that I've gotten them all right, but I was running around this idea that there are different kinds of no's, and that they're not all no's are the same. And that led me to really think about, if you treat them all the same, you're probably going to get them wrong. And so it's really about defining which no that you're dealing with in a given moment.
That makes sense. I mean, there's all kinds of different situations as parents, as leaders, that require different types of no's. But I want you to get a little more into what the different types of no's and some of their examples could be.
As I was thinking through this idea of the different kinds of no's, there are at least four, and I'm not saying this is exhaustive, but at least it gets us thinking. There are at least four different types of no's that we face as leaders. So I call them, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, whatever.
Like diabetes?
Yeah, right, exactly. Type 4 diabetes. It's really bad.
It's super bad.
So type 1 is the response to something that's unreasonable. The person's request just doesn't align with expectations or standards or fairness. That's an insane request. You don't necessarily say it that way, but that's just like, this is a non-starter.
That's a DEFCON 1.
Yeah.
Nope.
This is a clearly no. Okay. Hey, look, I need you to double my salary. No.
Can I punch my sister in the face? No.
I will admit that there have been times when I've told, especially my daughter, if you would just punch him in the face, he wouldn't do that anymore when my kids were growing up. So anyway, let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you'll order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. Type 2 no. This is circumstantial. Think of it as the not now response. In that situation, the person's request is probably reasonable, but it can't happen now due to some issue. That maybe timing isn't right. The available resources aren't there, or maybe the organization has prioritized some other things that are going to need to happen first before we can direct attention to this request that they've made. So that's the second type, again, not now. Type 3 is developmental, and that's more of a not yet. Think of this like, hey, Justin, you're not ready for that thing. A lot of times people may come to us and say, hey, I want this kind of role. Maybe they want to be in a leadership position. I want to be in this leadership position. Hey, I could see that happening in the future. I don't think that you're ready for it yet. Let's put together a process, some steps, some development that will get you there. So that's, again, focusing on the acquired skills that are needed, or even performing such that you merit the opportunity and are likely to succeed in it. That's a different kind of no, right? So that's the not ready no. And then the final no is about authority. Sometimes people ask us, for things that we don't have the authority to grant. We may think it's a great idea. We may want to say, hey, look, great idea. I could see that happening. That's not a decision I can make, but I can help you move forward with trying to champion it. I can endorse you to the people who maybe have the capacity to make that decision, but it's not one that I can make. So that's the fourth kind of no. And so thinking about these 4 types of no's, I think it's really important to distinguish those, because if you don't know which no you're facing, you won't know how to do it well, and that's almost certain to lead to unintentionally damaging the relationship and having a bad outcome that you don't want.
Even the difference between number 2 and number 3, like they both seem to be time related no's, but number 2 is the circumstances are not right. So I think the response of the leader, knowing, again, sort of doing what you suggest first, is identifying what type of no this is. That's okay, we need to either wait for different circumstances or to help develop the appropriate circumstances. The third type no is more of a time-related no, but not because of the circumstances. It seems to be related to the questioner's point. So at that point, you need to mentor them or help them get where they need to be, of it, not the circumstances. So completely same no, completely different responses by the leader on, okay, what do I do next? How do I help my team grow? One is, okay, let's get the circumstances, or let's pick the right time. The third one is, how do I help them get the skills or get the circumstance, or whatever it is. But if you didn't identify the type of no, you wouldn't know how to respond or what to do next. The no would be the end of the road. It would just be like, no. And then you're just hoping, which is never a plan, for things to change.
Right. Hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think that one of the things that's implicit in thinking about the types of no's is pausing to assess the situation, to actually figure out what kind of situation we're dealing with here. What is the no? You may know immediately the answer is no, but what kind of no it is, taking that moment to think about it. I've recently had and again, this is part of why I've been thinking about this and want to have a conversation about it, but had a recent example of having to tell somebody no. It's a fairly charged, at the outset, a fairly charged no, if you will, or the potential for one. So we had a high performing junior faculty member whom I've had the opportunity to mentor even over the last couple of years. And so she was interested in going up for promotion this year, putting all the materials together to put that forward to try to get promoted. And one of the things that I've done here is create very clear timelines. Here are the timelines. On this date, you have to have this done. This date, you have to have that done. Created the expectations, set out the requirements so that it's all very clear. We communicate those repeatedly. We have them on a web page. We've told everybody, if you're thinking about promotion, go here, see all this information, follow that, and it'll make it step by step easy. And so this faculty member knew the timeline. Multiple people had conveyed the timelines. She had acknowledged the timeline. And when the deadline came to have all the materials together, she asked for a short extension. And this was like one day. Just one day, can I get a 1-day extension? I'm so close. Tell you what, I'll give you 2 days. Gave the two-day extension, a weekend actually. I asked on Friday. We said, turn it in Monday. Sure. Crickets for 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, came back and said, can I get another extension? This is somebody, again, I really like this person. I think this person is highly capable, huge potential, doing a lot of great things, important things. And this promotion really matters a lot to her. And I want to support her in that. But at the same time, I'm responsible for fairness of our system. I'm responsible for maintaining standards and for ensuring that there's integrity in this process. So I had to tell her, hey, I can't do that. I can't grant that extension. Not because the goal wasn't important, but because the timelines had been clear and it wouldn't be fair to others. We've had a bunch of other people. They're just as busy, just as important to them, but they met the timeline. They met the expectation and the standard. So I had to say, no, can't do this. But also, I think this is really important. I told her, hey, but I'm happy to work with you over the next year to make sure that you're fully ready ahead of time to submit all your stuff for the next cycle. I think that's where it's easy to blow it on this thing. To think that the moment is over when you say no. But in many ways, that's when leadership actually begins. That's when you're really interfacing with dealing with the volatility, in a sense, and where the relationship could take a turn. So sometimes, and honestly, perhaps often that no, and this was the case with this faculty member, that no isn't even about that one individual at all. For us as leaders, that no is really about protecting the system, maintaining the standards, looking out for fairness for the other people who are also operating within those standards. It's about so much more. And I think that I've seen this, gosh, Justin, I see this a lot. And a lot of times people in leadership positions, and you'll note I didn't say leaders, people in leadership positions will just say whatever is convenient in the moment. Those people who are conflict averse, who can't say no, it seems like, will say whatever's convenient in the moment to get it off the plate, piling up a huge amount of problem down the road because they think it's easier for them in that moment. But B, they somehow see it as caring. And we talked about this in a recent podcast where we talked about holding people accountable. That when you don't hold people accountable, that's not caring. That's uncaring. That's unkind. Caring about someone doesn't mean saying yes to them all the time. It means holding to that standard that's bigger than any one person. And so I think that I've seen so many people in leadership positions fail tremendously because they do what's expedient in the moment. They think that they're caring about somebody's feelings and ignoring the fact that this isn't just this one person. This is all the people who are maintaining standard and all the people in the future who could look back and go, but you let that person do it. So anyway, I think this is, so important and easy to screw up if we don't buck up and maintain that standard.
I was thinking the same thing when you were talking about it. Sort of goes back to one of our previous podcasts of having difficult conversations, holding people accountable. Because if you had, in this example, had given that extension, then you're saying to everyone else, I know I said the fence is here, but actually it's out here. And if you hold people to different standards, then you are eroding the standard, the expectations, whatever you want to say, for the group because you didn't say no. But it's not getting to the no. It's the end of that example is not the no. The end of the example is the solution for the problem. The problem was they weren't meeting the standard. They weren't meeting the expectation. And the no wasn't the answer. The answer was, okay, you're not ready for it now, but this is how we are going to get to where your goal is. It wasn't really a no. It was all right, we're going to have to take a different path to get there. But that was only understanding your own standards, your own expectations, being clear with them up front, having the strength to say no, but then also understanding which no it was and having the mentorship moment to be able to do that. I think that's a real powerful example. And you're right. It's a lot easier to say yes, but man, golly, that erodes foundation, really erodes the foundation of all of your leadership. Let's now transition to where we usually go in this time in the podcast. We sort of really covered a great definition of it, given a couple of really good examples of it. And now we sort of laid out our framework of the different types of no, which is really defining what we're talking about. Let's get into the science of the topic. What is the science of having hard conversations, being willing to say no? What does the science tell us on this?
There's actually a lot of work that's been done in this area, and that work centers on the ideas of fairness and trust, really. And we've talked about those in different formats and different, perspectives in previous podcasts, but there's a lot here with regard to this idea. So first, people care more about fairness than outcome. There's this large body of research on what is called procedural justice. And that's led by different people. Some examples are Tyler and Lynn, and their work shows that people are much more likely to accept an unfavorable outcome, like being told no, if they believe the process was fair. In other words, people don't just ask, did I get what I wanted? They ask, was I treated fairly in how that decision was made? And that's so vitally important in this. Second, feeling heard and respected changes everything. Research in negotiation and conflict resolution, including work by William Ury, shows that one of the biggest drivers of acceptance is whether people feel heard and understood. Even when the answer is no, people respond much better when they feel like their perspective was taken seriously, the leader actually listened to them, and they were treated with respect. Third, trust is built through process, not just outcomes. Research on leader-member exchange, or LMX, which we've talked about before in various podcasts, which looks at the quality of the relationship between leaders and the people they lead. And that research shows that trust isn't built just by saying yes. It's built through consistent, fair, and respectful interactions over time. And I can say I feel confident that that's what occurred in the example that I gave earlier. So when a leader handles a no well by being clear and fair, it can actually strengthen the relationship. Then the final thing that I would add is inconsistent decisions destroy trust. On the flip side of this thing, when leaders make exceptions inconsistently or appear to play favorites, and that's exactly what happens when you move the goalposts. People see that as playing favorites. It damages trust across the entire group because people aren't just evaluating their own outcome. They're looking around. They're watching how other people are treated. And they're asking, is this system fair? So when we look at the science, it's pretty clear that people will accept a no if they believe the process was fair, that they were heard, and they were respected. But if one or more of those things is missing, even a reasonable no can damage trust.
I know I continue to go back to parenting in many of the things we do because the parallels
I've
of
been thinking
leadership
about that
and
the whole
parenting
time.
are so similar. And I know now with my 13-year-old, if he asked to do something, many times if I just tell him no, it's very hard for him to accept. It usually has to come with some semblance of understanding. Let's say we've got to go somewhere and we need to leave in 5 minutes. I'll say, hey, Noah, we've got to leave in 5 minutes. You need to turn off your game time. And he will not have played all his time yet. And he'll be like, but I don't, but I'm playing a game. And in the past, I've just been like, nope, let's go. And he's gotten frustrated and felt unheard. And, what I've realized is he's much more willing to accept a no if it comes with understanding, meaning, Noah, I know you're playing something that's really important to you. I know this game is really important to you, but we've got this other commitment. Put it on pause. Let's go do this other commitment. And when we come back, I'm going to give you some dedicated, protected time to do what you want. They're the same response, but what you really allude to of understanding, I'm not going to hold him to different standards that I hold his siblings, because then they'll be like, wait, whoa. We thought we all had to go and he gets to stay at home. And, so certainly the foundation has to be equity, shared expectations, trust, but also the person in question, the team in question has to understand that they were heard and that their concerns were heard and that they were valid, unless it's a type 1 where they're just an unreasonable request or dangerous. Yeah. I mean, that's just so true in not only parenting, but leadership. Now that we've got this framework for sort of diagnosing the no, which no am I talking about? Type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, which will then lead us into how am I going to respond? Not all no's are not created the same. And we know the science. We know the science of it being consistent with the no, saying a no when it's uncomfortable or uneasy, how that is the foundation for the relationships, foundation for a sense of fairness, trust. What do we always say? They can smell smoke. People are lie detectors, smoke detectors. They know it. So they know if, while shouting that the foundation is fairness, if you are not being fair. But how do we do this well? I mean, we sort of talked about the first part of it, obviously, is identification of which no are you talking about. But your example with the faculty member seems like it worked really well. So how did you get there? How did you get there? Is there a method besides the identification that we can sort of give our listeners to be like, okay, someone's asking me a question, and maybe it's something that you're not going to be able to respond to immediately, but they're asking me something, and it's not crystal clear that it's a type 1, where this is an unreasonable or dangerous request that I'm immediately going to say no to, but maybe it's one of the other ones. So how do you get to being a leader, not being in a leadership role, but being a leader to that person?
Is there a framework we can use? Yes, I think so. I think there's a process that we can use. I believe, just as you said, once we understand which no we're dealing with, then we can approach it in an appropriate way that demonstrates that we care for and respect this other person. I think those are really important, while also maintaining the fairness and our organizational standards. And so let's call it the respectful no framework. Okay. This is just something that I've kind of put together, but for now, we'll call it the respectful no. Okay. First, we need to understand clearly what the person is asking for. A lot of times we can misinterpret what someone is asking. We hear one thing we don't listen to the entire message, the entire request, and we jump to a conclusion. No, when in fact, maybe if we would have listened completely and understood, it would have been a different outcome. So this is part of that diagnostic for the type of no that we're dealing with. And so you can ask, hey, can you help me understand what you're hoping for with this request? Achieving clarity. What are they actually asking? That's really important.
That's a big one, getting to like, what are they actually asking? Because I do think we come into these with assumptions of what they're asking from our own viewpoint. That's a great point to be like, what are you really asking for this?
Yeah, because actually sometimes people don't know what they're asking, right? They may say, I want a leadership role, when really they're wanting something a little different. You may have said no to the leadership role, but it may be the other thing, the thing they actually were wanting once you've had a conversation is something different. And yes, maybe we can actually go that way, right? So just getting to that point, that one thing alone may change what your answer is. So figure out actually what their request really is. So that's number one. Second, acknowledge the value of the request to the person. People are coming with some ask because it's important to them. And if we blow that off, that's a killer. That can really destroy the thing. And it's as simple as saying something like, I can understand how this is really important to you. In my response to the junior faculty member, I acknowledged that I understood I know this is really important to you. So helping them feel heard, validated, but not endorsed, if you will. Okay. That's the second thing. The third thing is be clear and direct. Hey, look, I can understand how much this means to you. I really do. I know that, but I'm not going to be able to do it. Make that clear. And then explain, number 4, why you can't grant that request. As appropriate, tie it to the reasoning clearly to organizational goals, values, mission and vision, those sorts of things, the organization, if it's appropriate. Fairness to others. That's almost always present. It's fairness to others. Or the constraints of the situation that prevent it. Whether it's we're focused on other things, we don't have the resources, I'm not in a position to be able to grant that request. Again, going through the tides. Fifth thing, when appropriate, offer the path forward. Just like I said, hey, look, can't do that, can't extend that. However, I'm going to work with you over the next, year to make sure that next time around you're ready. Everything's teed up. And that's particularly important and even though that my example was really truthfully a type 1 because it was unreasonable. The deadline was way past, okay? But this is particularly important in type 2 and type 3, those that are not now, not yet, okay? You can include, delineating things like, here's what would need to happen for that to be a possibility, or, hey, let's revisit this idea whenever it's appropriate, 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever it may be. Or, hey, look, here's how we can work together toward accomplishing that. I think doing that, delineating that is really important. And then finally, recognize that the end isn't when you say no. Oftentimes, the leadership really starts at that moment. Don't shut down after delivering that no. This is an important relationship maintenance or even relationship building moment. Recognize their position. Hey, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. How are you feeling about it? How are you thinking about this right now? That opens up the opportunity to continue the conversation, to not just shut it down and turn them away, but to show that you're invested in this, you're invested in them, they're important to you, you respect them. And I think if you approach the no with this sort of mindset, with this sort of framework, you will have listened to the person's request, you will have acknowledged their perspective, and you will have treated them with respect and fairness. And I think that goes so far, like a long, long way. And doing so doesn't mean that everything's going to turn up roses, but at least based on science and my own experience, it gives you the highest likelihood of a positive outcome in what is one of the most challenging leadership situations that we face day to day.
I'm thinking about my own issue of, we were proposing something, somebody put up a challenge to it, and I thought about just responding, we'll take it into consideration. But I'm wondering, after you talk about this, has explaining or giving a more detailed explanation ever been a problem? Like, I know it's sort of a what am I thinking type of question, but like, has it ever been explaining caused more problems than a simple no, I guess?
Ever? I'm sure. That's the short answer. Yes, ever in human history. Yes, I'm sure.
Never say never, right?
Right. I think that in those scenarios, it's important to pause. It's important to try to get to, again, clarity. What is this person what are they really wanting? What are they really asking for? Okay. Because that can change a whole lot. That's really important. Hey, I acknowledge that I hear your request. Can you tell me why that's important? What your perspective is on why that's beneficial? I'm thinking of this as you ask this question, what I'm envisioning is a scenario where you're in some sort of meeting and here's the plan, and somebody lobs a grenade in and says, hey, I think we should do X, right?
Yeah.
And that may be unreasonable, but give them the opportunity to prove that it's unreasonable. Like open up a dialogue where you say, hey, can you expand on what you're thinking here? Help us to understand your perspective on this. That gives them an opportunity to share, because it may be, in fact, that it's not as unreasonable as you immediately thought it was. Because we come in these situations, we have a lot of times already thought about this from a bunch of different vantage points.
Mm-hmm.
We think we have the definitive answer. Maybe we do, but maybe we don't. Maybe this person's actually seen something that's a glaring problem that we have overlooked.
Yeah.
With our solution. And in fact, whatever they're requesting may actually be valuable, but we just don't know it. So taking that moment, because we're going to want to respond with the immediate no, I've got this figured out. You need to just be quiet over there, kind of thing. But if we give them an opportunity, maybe they can enlighten us in a real sense.
Yeah.
But additionally, it may be that they bring out something that is ridiculous, and it allows other people to say, that's ridiculous, or, in some other manner, so that you're crowdsourcing the no in that moment, but you got to give them the opportunity to share a little bit of what is it that, from your perspective, why do you think that would be a good idea, or something like that. You're showing you're valuing them, you're respecting them, you're giving them an opportunity to be heard, but that doesn't mean that you've got to agree to it.
As you were saying those things, I've learned sort of two things, not in the too distant past, of just because somebody's in the minority, and it may be the tiny minority, doesn't mean they're necessarily wrong. And it's tough not to, especially if the other people on your team want to do X, if somebody else wants to do Y, that it shouldn't be considered, especially if it's a blind spot for you.
It's fascinating. There's actually sociologic evidence out there that says the majority is usually wrong. I mean, people have studied this phenomenon, and so there are actually data out there that show those people who are in the minority, we probably should listen to them more, and that's where this idea of inclusivity comes from, right? Is there may be somebody over there who I'm thinking about to this conversation with one of the 4-star generals, and he said, there may be somebody there who 9 times out of 10 is a knucklehead, but that 10th time delivers a gold nugget that is so valuable, but you would never get that if you didn't at least give them an opportunity to be heard. So I'm thinking about
that. That's a really tough thing to do, is to separate the message from the messenger, especially if it's in contradiction to what you are believing. Like if you're just, oh, no, it's going to be a no, to even in that circumstance, to take a step back and say, okay, why am I saying no? What are they really asking? That's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, look at it. As you were saying that, I was just thinking about a lot of times folks in leadership positions think, I'm just going to shut this down. I'll say no, and we'll be done with it and move on. That's a fallacy. That is a huge fallacy. The moment you ignore that person, disrespect them, don't listen to them, however you want to frame it, is the beginning of a real negative relationship. And they're going to work to undermine you. And they're going to work to try to advocate for their position. And they're going to bring other people on board. They're going to undermine the trust, the relationships, not only with them, but with other people. And you're going to spend so much time and energy trying to correct that down the road. Whereas if you took that moment, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is, right then and there, to figure out what are they really asking for, I'm going to give them an opportunity to speak. I'm going to listen with a willingness to be persuaded. That's a really important moment to use that concept that we've talked about in the past that I got from General Jim Mattis. It can save you so much time on the back end. But we think, I'm going to save time by saying no, move on, right? And that's a huge fallacy, I think.
As I'm trying to think of like, what would I give people as a takeaway from this episode? I think it sort of dovetails into what you just said, is I think a lot of leaders, myself included, as soon as I realize what they're going to ask and I think it's a no, I just want them to get to the end of the sentence so I can tell you no and move forward. And that is catastrophic. And especially when you think the answer is going to be no, you have to listen to be persuaded, and also should probably be slow with your no's. Meaning, even if it's just in the moment, be like, I'm going to say no. Take a breath. Think, why am I saying no about this? What if I'm wrong? And maybe honestly, for me, a lot of times, if it's able, sleeping on it, like sort of getting whatever pride, whatever emotion sometimes that can come in, that, because usually if a no is going to be in contradiction to your line of thinking or your plan, or how you see it going. And sometimes it's up against an expectation or a standard, but then sometimes it's the path you're going and they're like, well, why don't we do this? Or why can't I do this? To really take the time and show the person the respect of, you ask this question, it's obviously important to you. I'm going to give it the appropriate amount of time, and then I'm going to get you back an answer. And that's my takeaway, I think, would be, is listen to be persuaded and be slow with your no.
I think those are great takeaways. I don't think I can add any more to it. Justin, this has been, I think, a really good conversation about a deceptively hard topic in leadership. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of how you can be a better leader starting today. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.